get the question in, make sure that you guys, if there's any curiosity out there about anything, it gets satisfied. The advantages of a smaller panel. I'm pleased to welcome the panelists today, and in the interest of having checking out the voice quality and on tape, I hope they can introduce themselves, maybe starting down the end with Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Nadell. I'm done. I publish Picture Box.
Right.
This is Sammy.
Right. Sammy Harcum.
Alan Buenaventura, published books under Buenaventura Press.
And I'm your host today, Tom Spurgeon, on a site called The Comics Reporter. I guess, the first question I kind of had was just looking at the title of the panel. Do you guys, it's been about 30 years since, almost 30 years since Raw and since Love and Rockets and since that kind of first wave of what we call kind of modern art or alternative comics. Do you guys object to there being kind of a label of new on those, or a label of difference? Do you guys feel like that there's something new about the comics that you do as opposed to comics just of that era?
I think my answer would have been different before because the show is a completely different crowd than I've seen before. I go to a lot of shows, but yeah, I don't look for it because I think this is new to a lot of people. This is just these things that have happened in the past few years that are reaching new audiences. It's new to.
Dan, is being at the show been kind of?
No, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's. Do I object to it being called new? Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I don't think. There are two things. One, it's been going on a long time, but it's really a function of distribution and awareness. I mean, it's not. If you don't want to see this stuff, just like if you don't want to see art, well, see, there I go, art films or whatever. So, you kind of almost have to make a category based on the economics of it and the distribution systems. I mean, I could argue that aesthetically, like, what Alvin and I both publish is much closer to the traditional comics as they were kind of invented commercially in America at the turn of the century than anything published by Marvel and DC. I mean, you could argue that Marvel and DC are the historical anomalies, and what we're doing is actually highly traditional.
True.
I mean, I think you'd be right to argue that. That's what I always think.
I mean, what of those comics? What comics from back then do you feel? How do you feel a kinship with them? In terms of.
I mean, I think that what like take somebody like Johnny Ryan, who's sort of is a classic, chaotic gag man. I mean, it's like looking at Milk Gross in the 20s or something, or well, with a lot of cocks and big vaginas, but that's a function of the underground. I mean, then the underground came out of being traditional. I mean, Crumb's a traditionalist, if nothing else. So, I mean, I think a lot of the artists I publish feel a lot of kinship with stuff, both, from the first part of the 20th century and stuff, with stuff like Mobius or Gary Panter and all those guys are also linked to traditional illustration forms and
For storytelling.
And narrative.
I can't even read most Marvel
I
DC
cannot.
comics. Like, I don't know how to read them.
Yeah.
I can't follow them. Whereas I feel like most of the cartoonists that we work with or enjoy are, very straightforward in most ways.
Very straightforward. I mean, I think of somebody like Kevin as being as straightforward as Frank King.
Totally.
Or as straightforward as Harry Tuttle, or and then I mean, as I thought my book illustrated, it's like there's tons of semi-popular stuff that was much weirder than anything either of us will ever publish, just by virtue of it sort of being under commercial. It almost got weirder. Sometimes it feels like to me it got weirder because it was under commercial constraints, like the limitations. It's like having like an anvil and crushing something, and then it forms a new shape.
You're talking about Art Out of Time,
Yeah.
Which is a book. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It's a book that Dan edited and compiled and then wrote about several artists who worked in the mainstream of American comics at a time at which there was no underground, there was no kind of outsider printing or press, so people that were a little stranger than some of the artists we might remember better worked in mainstream comics to often very odd results. And that, that book was a kind of it was a very popular book, but also it kind of drew attention to all these artists that were working in these, it just shows how little we know of kind of some of those traditions and stuff, and how what you guys do connects to those.
Yeah, and also how skewed, this is something, how skewed our vision of comics history has been just by virtue of like the handful of people who wrote it and were guided by, rightfully so, guided by their own interests in primarily sort of straight ahead genre material. So, I think we've been hugely affected by the personal tastes of Blackbeard, Goulart, Marshall, and what else is there? That's really it. Without their personal taste, we have an entirely different version of comics history, for better or for worse. I don't know if it'd be I'm not sure Spiegelman's taste is any more interesting, or it's just it's a toss-up.
Okay, let me back up a minute. I was wondering, maybe it would be helpful if we just talked a little bit from each one of you how you got into publishing, like the actual act of publishing other people's work, and maybe that would kind of give us an insight as to how your story might be different than those guys from 30 years back, or just kind of put a story to what you guys do. I don't know, Sammy, do you want to? How did you end up publishing?
I got into publishing because I really wanted to start releasing my comics, and I didn't think they would be. I didn't think there'd be interest. I just didn't even think of like setting up to Fantagraphics or D&Q or anything like that, or a publisher. And
you were a baby too. You were very young when you started publishing.
Yeah, I used to read the Comics Journal as a teenager, and there used to be these ads every issue for the Small Publishers Co-op, and they'd have the rates in the ad where it would be like you could print 500 copies for like $500, on newsprint, and it would be like 32 pages or whatever it was. So I was like, oh, this is like actually doable, So I did that while I was in college. I was like 19. I wasn't that young. And it was like me and a couple friends that I knew who were also making comics. And it just grew from there, where after the second issue, with the third one, I started asking people I didn't know, that I didn't know personally, because I didn't think of it as like a proper anthology. It was more a weird little thing. It was still trying to figure itself out. And then with the fourth, I started publishing cartoonists. I'm trying to figure out how that connects to what you're saying, though, like how it connects to those kinds of cartoonists from the past. I'm not sure exactly.
I guess what I was hoping by getting some of your story that there might be some thread that connects them that makes it different than Gary's story or Gary Groth's story.
Yeah, you know what?
Or
Okay. Well, basically, what it comes down to is that you have certain modes are already in place within alternative comics, right? And I would say that when I started working on, let's say, Kramer's 4, which is when I really started figuring out what I was doing, that was 2003. So I put that together in 2002. I would say for the couple years leading up to that, D&Q and Fana were very much not looking at outside work, and they were very